The Legend of Suma Hollow by Brian Obenauer. Life sucks, then you die, read the bumper sticker on the Pinto in front of me. How ironic, that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? I thought. I reflected back over the last several weeks, heck, the last several years, while clicking a retractable pen over and over. Have things been this difficult all my life and I just haven't noticed? Memories churned of the good old days. I used to be in the running for Employee of the Month regularly. Television was a family event. We laughed at the dinner table. We took a family vacation back west every summer. My thoughts rested on how things just aren't right between me and my wife, as well as me and the kids. Man, has it already been a year since we separated? I asked myself while watching the smoky fumes exiting the tailpipe of the Pinto. A dull ache accelerated into a sharp sting on the tip of my thumb, and I realized I'd stopped clicking and resorted to pressing and holding in the freaking little doodad. I released the pen and noticed a small circle indented into the flesh of my thumb. Idiot, I said aloud. I rolled my eyes and shook my head, laying it back against the headrest, then caught a glimpse of my snarl in the rearview mirror. Shut up, I snapped at the miserable oaf looking back at me. I was still sitting at a red light in the left turn lane with the 4 o'clock sun giving the side of my face all kinds of attitude. I clinched the steering wheel with all I could muster, twisting the wheel cover, taking an odd pleasure in listening to it whine and squeak. Geez, why does it have to be so hot? I said, pounding the wheel, and turned to give that unrelenting ball of heat some of my attitude back. If looks could kill, I'd have won that one by a mile. As it was, the sun's blinding imprint had me squinting to see if the Pinto was still there. I also wondered if the light was green yet, still red, or if I had an arrow. Dang sun, stupid traffic light. In fact, the whole stinking world knows where it can go, I said while checking best I could in the rearview mirror, despite the giant blot in my vision left by the sun. A long honk erupted from the car behind me. Guess I have an arrow. The honk blasted again. What the blivins are you honking at, you jack? Okay. Control, get control, I reminded myself. Try not to swear and try to stay cool, just like Dr. Seaver says. I was sick to death of the daily rut. Too many people to deal with, too many things to do, too many places to go. I was withering from the inside and not a one knew it. Outside my estranged wife, that is. If someone else did, even better. One more reason not to give a care. I remember driving by the Westlake Cemetery and gritting my teeth with envy of their rest. When's it going to be my time? When do I get off the train? I raised my eyes along with a fist to heaven and flipped a nonchalant middle finger. If you cared, why don't I know about it? The last thing I expected from that demonstration was an answer. 4 months later, one November evening, I was riding my bike down Shadow Pass, a long, winding cycling route off Suma Mountain. I was burning off some steam after an unbelievably miserable day. I still couldn't connect with my wife, the kids were acting out, the finances were a joke, and I had just found out my landlord was selling the house. It didn't seem to me like it was anybody's fault directly concerning all that was happening. Well, maybe part of it was my choice of lifestyle that caught up with me. Not luxurious, only comfortable. Still, that doesn't explain 2 of the kids' teachers quitting, Mom's cancer, Grandpa's accidental death a couple years prior, my wife's sudden onset of migraines, and so on. I guess most of the crap I've had to deal with directly was ultimately my fault, and somewhere down deep I knew it. You know, that gut feeling that's always there even when you try to ignore it. I was just trying to keep things upbeat for the kids. Is that so bad? Anyway, I was speeding down this rugged leg of the path on the mountain bike I spent our vacation funds on, and came up on my favorite turn. It banked hard, dipped, then quickly climbed steep and broke over a narrow ravine. If I could pick up enough speed, I'd go airborne for a solid 4, maybe close to 5 seconds. That moment was my escape. For once, the world waited for me. I hung in the balance with air 80 feet beneath and miles above me, tied to no strings. If I really wanted a rush, I closed my eyes and raised my face toward the sun. I needed more that particular time. I wanted to experience true solitude, timelessness, freaking poetic freedom. I hit the bank harder than I ever had, sped down the dip, caught the incline powerfully, and soared. If I was going to go for it, this was the time. The plan all along was to let go completely. I closed my eyes and spread eagle, then let go of the handlebars. I had no body contact with the bike whatsoever. It was magnificent. Did I find the rush? Oh yeah, it was a sacred moment. The adrenaline pumped hard while I tried to ignore the hanging thoughts to regain contact with the bike. Just another second, I told myself. I opened my eyes not knowing where I'd find the bike. More importantly, not caring. I got my payoff. For that moment, I was no longer the masquerading Clark Kent. I was the unyielding Man of Steel himself. A few seconds had afforded me brief immortality. I was surprised to find myself a bit relieved, though, to see that the bike had stayed with me. Yes, this may prove to be a good day after all, I said, reaching for the bike. I got a hand on it and maneuvered myself back onto it after pulling it in. The landing patch was coming up fast. I got my left foot secured but slipped off the pedal with the right foot. The back tire hit first, before I ever had a chance to reposition my foot on the pedal. My back landed hard against the slope with a thick thud, sending me toppling down the ravine. I remember being amazed at how quickly 80 feet can come up on a person. Just how long I was out, I do not know. The distant aroma of burning cedar delighted my senses as I came to. It took a moment to ascertain where I was and how I'd gotten there. The scrapes on my back, my shoulder feeling dislocated, and my knees and elbows skinned to the bone, however, provided a quick reminder. I looked 80 feet up the side of the mountain to where I should have landed. Funny how it doesn't seem so far up from down here, I said. The evening fog was beginning to settle in. I knew I needed to get home or I'd be in trouble with the coming overnight freeze. Besides, my computer's virtual weatherman said we'd see some rain tonight. I grabbed the bike, but before climbing on, realized I'd bent the rear rim. That's just great. So much for the good day. Geez, now what am I gonna do? I felt obligated to answer such a lame question. Start walking, Einstein. I figured someone must be nearby with a fireplace. Although the thought of the trees in the forest pointing me out to a raging out-of-control fire didn't seem too outlandish to me either. The aroma was very alluring. I knew I had to follow it. After all, shelter is shelter. What other choice did I have? The fog rolled in heavy along with a light mist. It wasn't long before my sleeves sopped and stuck to my skin from wiping the accumulating wetness from my face. The foliage was getting thicker while the daylight thinned. The end-of-day chattering and chirping from the mountain birds and squirrels evidenced that evening was nearly upon me. I figured I had about an hour of sunlight left. It seemed with each step it became more difficult to navigate through the density of the fog. After a slow, inclining walk that involved stretching my hands in front of me and testing for sure footing before each step, I entered a shady portion of the mountain. The ground went from a sturdy, mountainous terrain to marsh in a single step. Oh, great, I must not get a lot of sun back here. I was fairly certain that the splendid smell of smoking cedar was coming from just ahead, probably a cabin or something of the like. I decided I'd give the marsh 2 minutes. If I didn't come across some kind of clue as to where this place was that I was looking for, I'd find another way. After 30 or 40 sloshing steps, I came across a faded, weathered sign nailed to a tree. It read, "Property of," on the top half, but the bottom half was missing. Next to the base of the tree, in a small patch of grass, I held my gaze on a single black boot, its sole swathed in mud. Great, all I need is to get my head blown off, I said to myself. Or my foot, I continued, eyeballing the boot as I stepped over it. I proceeded cautiously, either ducking under or lifting branches of trees up and away from my face and squeezing between bushes, while trying my best to see through the light areas of the fog and make sense of what lay ahead. After several more steps, the slight smell of chimney smoke had mixed with the fragrant cedar, and I knew I was close. The fog suddenly began to thin, and in the distance, the trace of a small, run-down log cottage emerged. It was billowing smoke from its stone chimney, had one small round window on each of the 2 walls I could see, an A-frame roof, and a small door in the center of the wall facing me. As I got closer, I made out a path of stepping stones that the earth had begun to swallow. Steadily, I continued my approach, hoping not to alarm anyone. Through the window facing me, I could see cast against an opposing wall, the fire's dancing radiance. I stopped about 6 feet short of the little cottage and waited. For what, I'm not quite certain of. The place had an ambiance that was quite unremarkable yet peacefully regal. I stood gawking at this feeble abode, impressed with what I was feeling. The evening sky unfolded as the red and orange hues had diminished into a pale pink. I knew I was running out of time, so I took a deep breath, pulled up the slack in my sweatpants, and stepped up to the concrete block that served as a makeshift porch. Suddenly, the front door, weathered and aged, creaked open slowly. A ragged, long-haired man entered the doorway, then stepped out. His hair in a pony was a beautiful silver with a few dark streaks running from root to end. A few groups of strands from his bangs laid softly against the side of his face and across his high cheekbones. The skin on his face glowed with a baby-like tenderness, but the creases around his eyes and along his forehead spoke of age and maturity. "Welcome, my son. I've been expecting you," he said with a confident smile while extending a clay-encrusted hand out to me. I was taken aback. His statement confounded me. "What?" I asked blankly. The words reeled in my mind over and over. "I've been expecting you. How in the world could some hermit be expecting me?" I looked at his large hand, then up to his kind eyes and gentle smile, then back down to his hand. I was out of my element, to be certain. The idea of facing the cold night didn't seem so bad suddenly. That is, until I felt a sudden gust of frigid air rip through my clothing. I eyeballed that fire in a quick second. Anything with 4 walls and a fire was a pretty good sell at that point. I reached out my hand, then he took a step toward me and met mine, followed by a hearty one-armed hug with his free arm. His robes felt warm. He released my hand, then swept around to my side, keeping his arm behind me, escorting me inside. I stole a look at my hand and noticed some clay dust and a few smudges on the back of it. I took a look around this small 3-room cottage, feeling surprised at what I didn't see. Where was the kitchen, the dining area, and how could someone live on so little food? He caught my study of the bare shelves and said, "Can I interest you in some dinner?" I quickly looked back at him, replying, "You don't have enough here for yourself, let alone me. What I have is not for me, but for my invited guests." Invited? I had an 80-foot fall in which I wrecked my bike and am here by sheer luck. He tilted his head toward me while reaching for a plain-looking can and a cup, then said, "Do not all share in enduring the good and the bad?" "I suppose," I said. "And if the good comes but provides a pathway to the bad, is it still good? Furthermore, if the bad comes but brings with it the provision for change leading to a greater good, is it still bad?" he asked in a kind tone. Was all I could think to say. He continued, "How then does one conclude that luck has anything to do with any other single solitary event?" "Okay, fine," I conceded. "Well, what did you mean by saying I was invited?" "If memory serves, about 4 months ago you requested an appointment. I selected today to have you visit." "What in the heck are you talking about?" He simply smiled, then said, "Come, I have something to show you," with a wink and a friendly grin. He handed me a warm cup of soup in the less than impressive hand-fashioned cup I'd seen him reach for, and then headed toward the back room. The side room was dark. There was no door, just an entryway. I paused to steal a glance into it before following the old man. Nothing indicated what may lie in the darkness but a small pile of rigid, partially shaped pottery. "Sir," I said, "are you always here alone?" "I am but a potter. There is no need for sir in this house, my friend. And no, there are many that keep my company." He stopped short at a small table where a pitcher of water and a neatly folded cloth sat on top. He dipped the cloth into the pitcher, then wrung it out. "Let me see your back," he said kindly while stepping toward me. "I'm fine, really." "Then there is nothing to hide. Please take a seat." His soft words and delicate mannerisms made me feel like I was back at home as a kid when Dad was still alive. Memories of Christmas Eves with the family, leisurely Sunday afternoons, and family vacations poured into my mind. In fact, the more I relaxed, the more I felt like this place is what's been missing in my life. I was at peace. Who was this guy? I wondered. He gave me an insistent look, so I sighed and obliged him by putting down the soup. sitting, then lifting my shirt and turning around. After dressing the scratches and placing pressure on my upper back, I was thrilled to notice I no longer had pain in my shoulder and that full movement had returned. I leapt to my feet and said in an energetic tone, "You are amazing." He led me through a lace curtain and into the back room. He stopped and leaned against a wall, allowing me a moment to take it all in. My very breath escaped me. I placed an open hand upon my forehead and drew my hair back slowly, gawking about the entire room. On each wall were rows and rows of the most beautiful handcrafted vessels I'd ever seen. Among the earthenware were pots, vases, pitchers, and bowls of different sizes and shapes, each exquisite in its own way. A pattern of recognizable time periods flowed throughout. "These are gorgeous. They are more than beautiful. You made these?" I asked. I saw a modest grin crack. "Come on, you've got to be proud of these. They're priceless." "This is my work, but I give the credit to the clay." "What? Without a malleable subject, what good is a craftsman's art or a potter's hands? Still, without your hands upon them, what good would they be? They'd still be just a clump of clay," I argued. "You have made them valuable. What if this one," pointing one out behind him, "didn't want to be a pitcher but rather a large water vase?" "What kind of question is that? That's ludicrous. That thing exists only because you made it exist. You imagined it, you planned how you would design it, and you determined its purpose. Then you took it in your hands and crafted it. It would have to be incredibly stupid not to appreciate your work in its creation." He pulled it off the shelf and held it. "But look at the detail within it. I used several cutting tools to create the exact picture in my mind that I had in store for it to become. Now it's perfect. What if it doesn't think it's perfect?" I shook my head. "No, how could its opinion matter? It doesn't understand its full purpose. Without those tools, I suppose it might be different. But you are the architect. It's created for the purpose you determine. Doesn't that let only you decide whether or not it's perfect?" He raised an eyebrow at me. "If I'm creating a masterpiece, does it have a say in what it wants to be? Does it have the right to determine its own idea of perfection?" He bent down and gathered together a large clump of clay and set it down onto his kneading table. He said, "Tell me, what advice should this clump take from the pottery along these walls, if any?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Unless it wants to remain a clump of clay, it probably should take whatever it can get. Perhaps something along the lines of, whatever tools and methods he chooses to use in your creation, let him have his way and you'll come out on the other end perfect. More importantly, you'll have gone from nothing but dirt to something that serves a purpose." He turned and took a slow stroll as if in contemplation, but I knew he was just letting me mull over the words I had just spoken, as if to suggest I'd spoken a truth I had overlooked. Genius. He stopped, then turned and seemed to look straight into my soul. His eyes gave me an air of confidence, like they were boring into me, as if what I'd missed was on the precipice of dawning. And he could see it. His tone changed just slightly. It somehow sounded more corroborative. He asked, "Do you mean to say that every stroke of the tool, every pinch, tug, and stretch is part of the bigger picture?" "Well," I said, wondering what he was getting at, "I'm no craftsman, but yeah." He put the vessel back on the shelf. With the back of his hand, he brushed a few wisps of hair away from his forehead. "Take another glance around, son. You don't need to look. You need only to see." Okay, that was weird, I thought. That is, until I saw. My eyes picked out the most gorgeous piece in the room. I walked up to it and studied it. I looked closer still. What I saw was the identifying bits of a person's life within its design. The challenges this person faced actually made up its beauty. There were gems and gold borders and designs all over it. "Who was this one?" I asked, unable to believe what I was seeing. "She was born blind and deaf," came the sober reply. I turned to see his face beaming. He continued, "She was one of my greatest turnaround pieces. She has served well. She is certainly a prize. It is now her honor that I use her so many times to serve others." As I continued my study of the intricate design of the various characteristics such as pattern and smoothness, I switched my attention to the hundreds of jewels that adorned it. It appeared that every gem, every cut and smoothing of the tool, every change of pattern indeed represented some kind of struggle. It was obvious she had persevered. I began to look at the others. Walking by each one of them, I began to identify a solitary life within it. It was amazing seeing what people had endured and what beauty was attached to it. I ended up at a table in the center of the room. I stood for a moment unsure of what to feel, for I was looking at my life within a half-finished, beautifully constructed vase. First, I saw several Christmas Eves and much family fun as a kid. The brief revisit had my mind whirling in happy memories. Then I took a deeper look. There was a splendid design where my father passed away, and immediately I remembered the pain. I stared directly into what I was experiencing at the time. After a moment, I continued my inspection. There were jewels and wonderful designs of all kinds surrounding challenges I faced with my wife and kids. Then sorrowful tears filled my eyes for what could have been, for what should have been. Colors I'd never seen in brushstrokes were strewn across at the different jobs I'd had. I started pointing things out loud. "Wow," I said, swallowing hard. "That's where I told my wife I knew she was having an affair. That's where my son told me he hated me. Here's where I found out Mom got cancer and Grandpa's accident and..." I froze in observation of the bowl next to my vase. What looked like a tremendous wound was worked over with gold and rubies. It was my wife's. It was when I told her I wasn't happy with our marriage, with her, and I had accused her of having an affair with no proof to substantiate it, no less. I went over to it and stared at it. I experienced what she had felt. As I started going over the bowl, I began to break down. As I rounded the table, I stood aghast at a horrendously deep gash in its side. I looked up at him and demanded, "What happened here? What is this? Who did this to her? I don't see anything tied to it." His eyes lowered for a moment, then raised back up to meet mine. "She won't give that to me yet." "The affair?" I said under my breath. My legs suddenly felt like cast iron pillars and I fell. Every thought was hijacked with the sting of realizing my part in her pain as I held my gaze on him. "It was a couple of weeks," I cried. "It was nothing. I was hurting and distracted. I was confused. I didn't know who I was. We got through it." I looked back at the disfigurement and added, "I thought." Wiping my eyes, I looked up at the potter. Everything about him became solemn. He said, "Yes, that was most of it originally. We've made progress. She gave as much of that as she could to me. What she couldn't give to me, what she won't give to me, is what remains. And because she won't, it's become poisoned by the collapse of the value she holds for herself. The toxin began its work the moment she took her eyes off me. Thoughts of unworthiness such as, he doesn't think I'm beautiful anymore, I'm not worth anything, I'm not enough, and so on, set in like venom." He wiped an eye with the back of his wrist, then added, "And then there's this one. He can throw me away. It's okay. I know I'm nothing. Nothing to anyone. That one," he said, taking a breath, "rips my heart apart. She is precious. She is beautiful. She is enough. And because my hands are on her every day of every moment of her life, she is worthy and more than beautiful and more than precious. She is, because as her architect, as her creator, I say she is. The contaminated part of the wound you see is based on a false belief, a system that is dependent on how you and her children, her parents, and others view her. But there's not a morsel of truth in it. I am creating her, not them. Anyone's opinion of her other than mine is a cancer to her, to you all, as this is not unique to her alone. Not a one thinks of themselves perfectly, my son. And thus, it has been my burden and utmost pleasure to help them understand their true worth. All of these, and more," he said, extending his hand across the great room. "They all had flawed beliefs about themselves, but when they rested their trust in my work, they truly believed flawlessly. My son, you are a tool I have chosen for her life, and I am so proud of her. I'm so proud of you. At times the clay resists and breaks and needs mending. That particular wound, the poisoned wound, requires a deep cutting tool. When mending is required, as it often is, my greatest care and attention is devoted to it. It is my desire for your wife to become the perfect shape I have planned for her. This is why I must give the credit to the clay. The more malleable it's willing to become, the less mending it requires and the more I can do with it. Through her life, I will rework the wounds, and in the end, it will be perfect. The wound will always be there. It's part of what makes her unique. And the scar left by the poisoned wound, by far the most intricate and beautiful in the end, in every piece you see, stands as testimony of their surrender to my opinion of who they are. It's part of why the whole will one day be priceless. I stood and walked back to the table and caressed the gorgeous vessel that is my wife. While reading the design of her life, I said, "She truly is extraordinary, isn't she?" Next to hers were my kids, jewels and beautiful designs encircled wounds I inflicted. I found them right away. There's where my son told me he hated me. A closer look revealed that he felt abandoned after months of not giving him the time of day. "What do I make of this?" I asked. The potter said, "Just as you understand that struggles equip your children, so also they serve your purpose in becoming complete. Understand that no matter what happens, it's part of what will make you beautiful in the end. What you encounter is never nearly as important as how you respond to it, my son. Treasure that which challenges your weaknesses. Minister to your wife and kids and teach them to become moldable by your example. There is nothing I have not taken into consideration in shaping them for their unique purpose. I have everything under control. There is nothing too big or deep that is not part of what will serve in making each of you who you are intended to be." He smiled and said, "Find your wife, love her, enjoy her, and your children." He walked over to me with a peace and a confidence in his eyes I will never forget. He wrapped his arms around me in a warm embrace, then placed a hand on the side of my face. "Now go, live your beautiful life," he said. He escorted me to the door. He saw me glance over to the darkened room and said, "I'm still working on them. They have not been forgotten." He opened the door for me, and I suddenly realized not a second had passed since I entered the cottage. The sky was the same pale pink as when I stepped in. My bike, however, stood completely restored just outside the door, and my skinned knees and elbows didn't hurt anymore. The first thought I had was to complain about having to deal with the weather in the marsh. He placed a hand on my shoulder, then said confidently, "The cool air will strengthen your endurance, and behind the cottage is a dry trail leading directly to the bottom of Shadow Pass. Accept difficulties with gladness, my son. Capitalize on hardships. There's beauty and significance in all of them." 3 years have passed since then. My family is back together. I'm loving my wife and truly appreciating my job, even when I don't get Employee of the Month. And I'm still learning what it means to capitalize. You know, after I followed that trail to Shadow Pass, I never could find it again leading back into the woods. But every so often I catch that good old distant aroma of smoking cedar. It's beautiful. The end.